All right, awesome. So everyone joining the stream, this is Phillip. He runs the Instagram and business Arids only. Phillip, can you tell us a little bit about what you do, what species you work with?
Yeah, for sure. So the primary thing I think I'm known for most in the community would be Uromastyx, and they're the mostly herbivorous, medium-sized to large-size desert reptile, spiny-tailed, kind of like a shellless tortoise with a spiny tail. Um, work with, well, I've worked with all the species that we can get here in the States, but over the last few years, I've been narrowing down to focus primarily on Uromastyx ornata, Egyptia, Yemenensis, Princeps, Thomasi, J. Rye, and Nigraventris, because for my time and effort and my space, those are the species that I think are the best ones for future, like in terms of having a future for the pet trade, and having a future just for interested herpetoculturists. I have a few side projects that I work with. I have a handful of Ackie monitors. I have Nephris amii, the rough knobtail gecko, a couple of the giant Cuban anoles, and but then the other lizard that I think, even though I'm known for the Uromastyx and I have these little side things, Xenogama taylori are the other, the little shield-tailed or beaver-tailed agamas.
Right.
Those are another one that I've been building up over the last 4 years, and have been breeding consistently now, and I think have a pretty big future, or at least could have a big future in herpetoculture. And so now those will, I think, over the coming years, will continue to be a bigger part of what I do. But it's going to be the Uromastyx forever, probably, unless something happens, something weird or catastrophic happens where I can't do it. It's going to be those guys, the primary thing.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty awesome. I mean, all the species that you just named are species that I have kind of minor experiences with. I'm most experienced with Uromastyx. I haven't kept them, but I've worked a lot with them. Mm-hmm. Kind of what got you into those species? Because they're very niche and not a lot of people know about them.
Yeah.
And I think they're very slept on. So kind of what pushed you into that?
Yeah, totally. So I got my first Euro when I was like 16 or 17, and I had been working with bearded dragons just for fun and whatever in high school. And I went to my local shop, and there was a guy there selling a male Molly. One of the guys, he turned out the guy who was working there at the time, his name's Nick Dokai. He and I are really good friends. He's been a big influence on me in my my herpetocultural career. And I was just looking for something different, like I was just kind of bored of working, not bored of it, but just, whoops, sorry, almost muted myself there, but was just wanted to try something else. And so I bought this Molly, and I bought it without doing any research, like a total dummy, and went and started doing research once I got it home. And I was just like, oh shit, these things are unbelievable. They're so many different varieties. At the time, there was still a lot of regular importation of lots of different Uromastyx species, and I just got hooked, and I was like, okay, this is the thing, And over the years, I worked with a lot of different ones from the time that I was in high school until the first time I ever bred a Uromastyx. But I had different, whether it was career changes or college, I had undergrad and then a post-grad program that I was doing. And then I lived in Germany for a couple of years. And so all of my time working with them was relatively sporadic, and I bounced from species to species. So the first one I had was a Molly. And then after that, I got into the Egyptians, and then I kept some Ornata, and then I kept Saharans. I just kind of kept going. And even though they never, at least at first, they didn't, it wasn't ever something I thought I'd be doing as a career. They just interested me. There was something about them, something about the way they look. And then when you keep them, there's something about their behavior that's really, really intriguing, because, they all have very different personalities, but they're also they have really, really nuanced behavior, and they're really fun to have around. Even if you just have one as a pet, they're a great time. They're very intelligent. They respond strongly to routines and to even a little bit of training. They're really good at learning, and they're long lived. So they're mostly herbivores, so they resemble tortoises in that way, but they're not a tortoise in this. They don't eat as much as tortoises. They don't defecate as much as tortoises. And they live a long time, but they don't live as long as tortoises. And most of them, except the Egyptian, of course, don't really get very big at all. None of them, I would say, even the biggest ones, the nigriventris, the Moroccans, even the biggest Moroccans and Flavifasciata don't really get that much bigger than a bearded dragon, if at all. And so that, coupled with all the different color varieties and everything, they pretty much became impossible to ignore.
Yeah, absolutely. They are definitely up there in species that just have so many qualities as a pet. I feel like a lot of species kept nowadays are freshly imported species that are kept mostly for looks, and they simply have a lot of problems. I mean, let's use green tree pythons as an example, right? Mm-hmm. Such a high demand. I mean, it is crazy the demand that they have. But they're quite difficult to breed. Mm-hmm. They are mediocrely difficult to keep, and the reason why they have such a reputation for being so hard to keep is because there's just so many imports. They're just mass imported, coming in. And so many of the species nowadays that are being commonly sold are like that, where they're very difficult to keep because of the importation side of things. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't really realize about Uromastyx is, like, in my experience, even the imported ones, even the wild caught ones, the captive bred specimens, they're all just great.
Yeah.
They're so unique, so amazing, and so just keepable. It's not really perfect, but they're very enjoyable.
Yeah, so I think you hit on some interesting points. I might slightly disagree with you in the sense that, in my experience, I do think, like, personally, I've had great luck with almost all the imports I've ever had. Don't get me wrong, I've lost some. I mean, I've kept hundreds of them now. So it's like, inevitably you're going to lose some when you're working with certain numbers, because some stuff just doesn't work out. Right. But I think that it's probably true of Uromastyx, but it's probably a broader reality about keeping herps is that the reality is that with pet industry stuff, we have very well-defined ideas about how to keep dogs, cats, horses, chickens, gerbils, guinea pigs, right? There's a longer history of keeping these things in captivity.
Absolutely.
There's, you can buy fortified diets for half these animals and birds and stuff, where you could be basically a moron. And if you just feed the damn thing once in a while and, like, let it run around outside, you're going to have, your dog's probably going to be healthy. Don't hit it. Don't hit your cat's probably going to be healthy. Your parakeet's probably going to be healthy. I might be making a bit of a broad generalization, but
I get what you mean.
Yeah. But I think with reptiles, we don't have that for a few reasons. One is herpetoculture is a super young industry. And because of that, there's not really been enough time, except for a few species, to really say, okay, if you do these 5 things, you're going to be fine. So for things like leopard geckos, crested geckos, ball pythons, bearded dragons, we have a relatively well-defined set of things that we know to do to keep these animals okay and keep them alive and well for the most part. It doesn't mean it's complete, and it doesn't mean it's not without revision coming down the line, right? But I think with most reptiles, we just don't really have great intuitions about how to keep them alive and how to keep them happy. And so I think that you can probably say that there's 2 truths. One would be, or not truths, but 2 general ideas that I think about is, I think that all this stuff that we think of is super easy, like the ones I just mentioned, ball pythons, crested geckos, leopard geckos, etc. Those things might be a little bit more complicated than the average herper likes to think that they are. And then the stuff that is what we all consider as higher level, probably won't be as hard as we think it is in 10, 20, 30 years. We're probably going to look back and, I mean, who knows? I mean, I don't know that for sure, but I just have a sense that there's probably a bit of a middle of the road for all these species. And it's going to be a steep learning curve for us because what works for a Euromastix is probably not going to work for a green tree python, right?
100%.
So there's going to need to be lots of different subsets of people who dive into these things and give them the kind of dedication that people have given dogs, cats, horses, etc. for centuries before we have a better understanding of how to keep them alive, and a more rich and sophisticated base level of keeping understanding,
Right. 100%. I definitely agree with that. I mean, if you kind of look back, let's say 20 years ago when ball pythons first started to get kind of big, like even the big guys, Brian, Kevin, all these big breeders, they had trouble figuring out how to keep these ball pythons alive. They couldn't get them to eat. They couldn't figure these things out. And I think that definitely plays into what you were just saying. Like every species has its kind of portion in its industry life, let's say, of being kept, where it's like no one really understands it, And I think one of the reasons why sometimes we have a hard time understanding newer species coming into the hobby is because we like to use past experiences on the new animals. So we like to compare, let's say, ball pythons and boa constrictors. I see so many people doing it when their care is honestly very different.
Oh, yeah.
They require very different needs, but people still compare them the same because we're used to keeping ball pythons. Why would we want to stray our minds into thinking in different manners and a different light to adapt that way? You know what I mean?
I do. Yeah. I mean, one of the most erroneous comparisons that I get all the time, and I see whether it's in the Euromastix groups or whether it's from direct messages or emails that people send me, is they say, "Oh yeah, no, I know that Euromastix, you're real similar to bearded dragons," and I'm like, I kept bearded dragons for 15 years, and I see very, very few similarities between Euromastix and bearded dragons. Now, superficially, okay, we're talking about two desert reptiles that are relatively similar sized, but that's about it, man. Like I don't see a huge similarity between the two. One's a profound omnivore, and one is very likely 99% herbivorous with the occasional insect food. One is, bearded dragons, I understand that they're a desert reptile, but I've seen wild habitat photos of bearded dragons. It's not like the highest desert. It's not like the desert that Euromastix come from. It's not the same. I mean, I guess it's similar, but it's not like Euromastix come from cliff sides and flat, like Egyptians will live out on these flat, almost dune, loamy, total desert flats, and they're monsters, and they're eating mostly dry foods. I mean, it to me, they're just not the same. But I do think, I don't know. I mean, I think what you're saying speaks to the fact that so many reptiles are really, really adaptable, and they can do reasonably well on a spectrum that's within a specific range. You know what I mean? So, but I think that the more time goes by, we might have a few more standardized methods. Like I could totally envision in 10 or 20 years going into a shop and seeing a kit, and the kit just says desert lizard kit, and it'll say like suitable for bearded dragon, Euromastix, chuckwalla, desert iguana, collared lizard, or whatever. I could see, and I get that. But it's like people do it with dogs and cats too, right? So I've had dogs and cats my whole life, and most of the time people who are dog people don't like cats because they compare them to dogs, and people who are cat people don't like dogs because they compare them to cats. And it's like, dude, you're talking about two totally different animals. Why in the world would you give them the same? Why would you try to treat them as if they're the same thing and make
apples and oranges?
Yeah. It's apples and oranges, and I don't really see the value in that personally. But Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you're right that some of the problem with a lot of reptiles is that people do that.
Yeah. No, 100%. I think that's something that's always been a problem in keeping any animal is just wrongful comparisons, you
Yeah.
know? But I feel like it's also just like part of human nature almost. Like our minds just want to make things simpler because it is very complicated. When you start getting into different spectrums of UVB and heat and this and that, when you can just clump it all together and be like desert lizard need
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
It's just simpler.
Yeah. Well, and admittedly, given a scenario, let's pretend that I'm the first person to ever receive a Euromastix from the wild. And like, I don't even know what it is. If I ask them where it came from, they might give me their country of origin, but maybe they don't know exactly where the animal came from. And maybe in a book, I find one picture and it looks like this animal comes from a desert locale. I would probably treat it like a bearded dragon as well.
Yeah.
I just, so if you're looking for something to go on, for something brand new, then I totally relate to feeling like you want some kind of base to operate under or operate from. But I think at some point, it's always baffled me because you get the opposite end of it too, where all of a sudden people will try something new. So, for example, with Euromastics, early on in their development in the United States, anyway, there were guys like Doug Dix and Lindsey Pike and Noah Alt and Randy Gray, all of whom I have a great deal of admiration for. And they tried some new stuff, right? They were the ones who started giving them various seeds, certain dry foods and things like this, which is an interesting change, but it's one that in recent years, I've kind of maybe campaigned, for lack of a better word, against those kinds of foods for various reasons. I just have a lot of reasons to think that you really shouldn't be given too many of those things to Euros. But that kind of the idea that you should give them a lot of seeds, you should give them a lot of lentils, you should give them raw bee pollen daily. Like, people do that in droves, and it's very, very hard to kind of change that course once the wheels are turning on some of this stuff.
100%.
It's really challenging. I mean, it's the same. Another great example would be with like bearded dragons and leopard geckos. People would be like, "Oh, you can't keep them on sand; it'll cause impaction." It's like, that's the biggest load of horseshit I've ever heard. It's like that's not how it works. Have you seen? Yeah. But people, it's very hard to put that genie back in the bottle once it's out.
Absolutely. I mean, I worked in a reptile shop. I did retail for a few months, and selling reptiles to people who walk in, they do no research.
Yeah.
It blew my mind.
Yeah, it's hard.
The people that walked in. And then when you try to explain to them, like, that's not how it works. And I have no problem doing that. I love educating people, giving them the right information. But when you try and do it and they think like they just know better, they think this is the way. And, they watch 3 YouTube videos and they're like, man, leopard gecko sand dead.
Yeah, sure.
It's so hard to change that. And I feel like it's one of the big downfalls of the industry is just like once a bit of information comes out and for a short period of time it becomes a standard, it's almost impossible to change it. Yeah. I mean, I have seen so many people try and so many people fail.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where you at least I really don't like to think of myself as anybody of importance at all in any regard. But I do recognize that because of the reputation that I have and the following that I have specifically in the Euromastics community, that I end up with kind of like a little bit of power in that regard, because I can set trends and things like that. But I would say that it's probably easier or better to just set the example. Just be like, look, here, like I most of the time when people come to me about any topic with Euros, whether it's cohabitation or how much dry food they're feeding, or whether or not to feed insects, or whether or not to bathe or soak them, and let's pretend that they have a totally opposing view to me. I'm like, all right, that's fine. You can feel that way. you do you, but I'm just going to tell you here's why I think you shouldn't, and then take it or leave it. You just kind of forget about it. You can't really waste too much time with it. And over time, if your results are good enough, then that speaks more than you ever have to, like I don't get me wrong. I've had my moments where I get frustrated and I'm like, listen, guy, here's why you don't get it. And I can tell you all the reasons you don't get it, but I've gotten so little mileage out of that compared to just like, look, I produce a couple hundred euros every year, and it's more than anybody else in this country. And I don't know, I'm not sure. I don't know any other person who does that, honestly. Again, I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I'm just saying, eventually, if you put in the work and you have enough consistent results, then eventually people are just going to listen, because they're like, all right, well, he seems like he knows what he's doing. Things are working for him, and you don't mess with success. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess you bring up, kind of your scale of keeping on things. Mm-hmm. Like, how many breeders do you have?
It's a little bit in flux, but it's around it's about 60 resident adult Uromastyx, wow. with some variation in there. It depends. I'm hoping to get somewhere closer to 100. Like permanent adult breeders,
right?
But it depends on. There's a lot of factors there. I've been growing a lot over the last 5 years, and then I've made a few changes where, for a while maybe I had 40, but then there were 12 different species in there, and now I have 60-ish or a little more than 60 permanent resident adults, plus holdbacks growing up, and then, but it's a narrower range of species. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's like more Ornata than a lot more Ornata than I have anything else. Yeah. And then of course, so it's again, approximately 60-ish adults. And then I think there's like 30-ish, approximately 30 animals younger than 2 or 3 years old that are growing up, who are going to add to that in the coming years.
That's awesome, man. I mean, to build such a collection with species like Ornata, because I never see Ornata available. I mean, yeah. Mm-hmm. To me, they're like the local myth,
yeah.
You hear all about him, you see all the photos, but I've never even seen one in person.
Sure. Yeah.
They're pretty awesome. I mean, out of all the species of Uromastyx, mm-hmm. why did you kind of seem to focus more on the Ornata? Because you keep other species, but it seems like you do a lot with the Ornata. What kind of narrowed that down for you?
Yeah, great question. So it's just a number of factors. There's the obvious one, which is that they're probably the most colorful Uromastyx out there in terms of just color variety, vibrancy, consistency of being colorful all the time. Like you have, you have other species like the Saharans and the Moroccans, so Jairai and Nigroventris, super bright, super colorful animals, but they'll get dark and they'll be kind of pissed off sometimes, and that color will change a lot throughout the day. Whereas a peak jacked up male Ornata is going to be bright pretty much from the moment he wakes up to the second he disappears for the day. I mean, they'll do just like any other lizard. They'll get dark and light based on mood and time of day and temperature and all that stuff. But Ornata just have so much variety there. And then there's related species, right? You have like Uromastyx Ornata Philbii, which is the subspecies of Ornata that also is super, super popular because they are, the adult males can have this deep, rich blue with an orange stripe down the back.
Right.
And they're great. Don't get me wrong. However, they're pretty narrow in the sense that there's very little variety within that color palette. Now, in the wild, there are Philbii that occur in banded forms and ocellated forms, and there are green Philbii and blue Philbii and bicolor Philbii. So they're out there, but they're not here. And even those ones that have a little bit of variety, they're just it's not as rich a color palette as Ornata. Ornata don't get as big as Flavifasciata or Nigroventris. Ornata generally have a little more tolerance for in my mind, they lend themselves to it to be a really nice display animal, because they are like American chuckwallas and they dwell on cliff sides and live in crevices. They can be placed in a very tall cages if you want, or very wide cages. You can do any kind of caging you want. And another factor for me was the rearing of babies. So certain species such as Moroccan Uromastyx and banded Uromastyx, which is nigroventris and Flavofasciata, and then mollies, that whole disbar complex, those babies are assholes to one another. I mean, they try to kill one another very, very early. Like, some people will say, "Oh, I've been breeding them for 5 years and mine never hurt each other." I'm like, well, you're definitely missing it. I can promise you that. But even if you're not, that's a narrow example. I'm talking across numerous pairs across many years. They always try to kill each other. The babies are very, very aggressive. Ornata, even though they can be very aggressive with one another if they want to, and whatever, I've had more Ornata than any other species, and they do okay in groups as babies for a while. I can keep them together for, at least as long as I need to until they're ready to ship. And then they have a tendency to show themselves in terms of sex, usually getting better at sexing them now. And I feel much more confident saying around 3 months old, I can sex an ornate, which is pretty rare. I get it wrong sometimes, but I'm getting a lot better. So you put all those factors together, I think that they're the best possible candidate for, at least for the pet trade. Now, I have other species where I think there also is potential, but I'm just not trying to put all my eggs in one basket. So I also think Moroccans, just despite the babies being assholes to each other, are really, really good candidates for the pet trade. I think that Saharans are excellent candidates for the pet trade. I also think that Thomasai and Princeps fit that bill too, but those two are much, much more rare, and it would be a lot harder, I think, to get them broadly available on a pet level, as opposed to the Ornata, which we have enough. At least I've got enough, unrelated Ornata. We got plenty. There's no problem. I have enough unrelated animals to throw out, more than enough founding stock, if you will, right?
Right.
Whereas I think Thomasai might make the better pet, because Thomasai can be really, really relaxed in general, but Thomasai are from a very, very limited group of animals that ever even left Oman in the first place, and they're just rarer. It's a little harder. So I think Ornata are the best, generally speaking.
That is interesting. I mean, I don't know too much about the Ornata, and specifically the species I have the most like physical working experience with is the Saharans.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
I know the Ornata are super popular for their colors, and I know they were kind of getting popular for their kind of wellness in the pet trade. You know how they do in captivity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm enjoying hearing you talk about these things because I don't know much about them. Mm-hmm. But kind of swaying onto kind of the business side of things. Do you do this full time, or do you have a part-time gig, or?
No, it's full-time reptiles. I mean, I do other stuff for myself, but none of the other things like pay my bills or anything. So
right.
I'm also a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coach and competitor.
Awesome.
And then I'm an illustrator. I used to do that as work, but no, now it's just the reptiles.
Right. So like, how does that work for you as a person? Because I've talked to a lot of people who do reptiles full time. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of people don't even like to talk about doing reptiles full time because people just come at them. Oh, you're doing it for the money, this and that.
Oh yeah, sure.
I think that's kind of a load of crap. You know, I think it's kind of just a poor man's mentality. Like, why would you not want to do what you love and make an income off of it?
That's right. Yeah.
And people who say there's no money in reptiles, I also kind of call crap on that. If you do it right, I think there's a massive amount of money. I think the big catch is like the amount of time you have to put in to make money, mm-hmm. and for it to pay off, mm-hmm. is like uncanny. I mean, it's insane.
Oh yeah, no, Yeah, I can personally attest to that. Like the amount of time and money I've thrown into this hobby is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. So it has its challenges, right? I mean, one thing I struggle with sometimes is, or not struggle with, but one thing that's just a reality of doing this for a living is like, yeah, you get those criticisms. People will say, "Oh, you're doing it for the money," or you also run into the realities of like, if you can feel some uncomfortable sometimes thinking that, all right, if these animals don't breed for whatever reason, or if something happens, then I lose my income. You
Right.
know what I mean? So
100%.
of course, all of those things are in there, but you know what? I don't really think that there's a lot of conflict. I feel like there's absolutely no reason that I can do what I love, do it well, put a lot of effort and a lot of energy into it, get paid for it, and it's not that bad, honestly. Like it's a great schedule. There's some cons, like vacations are a challenge, right? I get to do them because I have a great support system with my family and my fiance and everything. We have a lot we're able to do, but it's hard. You can't go away for 2 weeks. That's for sure.
Oh yeah.
Because my animals, I could probably in the winter I could probably get away with it when everything's asleep. Um, but it was something that I didn't really think was feasible either for a long time. I thought that reptiles as a profession was for the lucky, the ones who like the guys who either grew up doing it when reptiles were still a real wild west, like back in the 70s and 80s, or the guys who lucked out hatching some rare mutation of ball python, or who had money to start with. Maybe I remember having a lot of that in my mind, but quite frankly, doing this as a business was something I honestly kind of stumbled into. I didn't set out to do this as a business from the start. I wanted to work with Uromastyx just in general, and the first time I ever bred them, the first species I ever bred was Uromastyx thomasi, which is really weird. Because they're pretty rare, and it was just odd that happened to be the first one I produced. But it was basically I just bred them for a few years, and every year I'd hatch them and I'd sell the babies, and I'd take that money and I'd either put it back into the animals themselves, or I'd use it to buy new animals for myself or whatever it might be. But then I don't know, it was just this kind of thing where I just grew a minimum viable audience. I have enough people who want Uromastyx, and there's a sufficient. I'm not 100% sure this could be done. Some of it's pure luck and timing. You know what I mean? Like you look at guys like Lindsay and Doug Dix and Noel, all these guys back in the day who kind of like laid the groundwork. They were doing a good job in figuring out how to breed stuff. But I remember having somebody tell me you could never make a living off of Uromastyx because they're just not consistent enough, and they only breed once a year, and if you miss it, you have to wait a whole year and all this other stuff. All that might be a little true, but I just felt like after a little bit of time, I was like, no, I'm plenty consistent. I can get this to happen. Mine breed every year. Like this year, my Thomasi, if they produce, this will be 13 years in a row.
Wow.
Or I mean, no, I'm sorry. He's 13 this year, but this will be the 10th year in a row that they've produced. Amazing. And it's they've got no problems. The babies hatch out healthy. Everybody's great. The animals look like they're a year old still. They don't look like they've been phased at all. And there's a market for them. There's enough people who want them that, it just so happens that I stepped into breeding Uromastyx right as there was a huge loss for them in the market, because no one was working with them anymore, because Doug and Lindsay and all those guys, none of them breed Euros anymore. They don't work. They're not in it. So there was no one doing it. There was a demand for them in the market. And then at the same time, a huge drop in the amount of importations. Whereas like pre 2011 ish, there was just people were importing them ruthlessly, like all the time from all different countries. We got lots of different Euros in here. But after 2011, 2012, they started to drop off and get less common and less consistent. And so it just became this thing where it was like, all right, I mean, I'm making enough money doing this. I don't have to do these other things. So I'm going to keep doing that. I'm going to put all my chips in that to a certain degree. Now, it's super stressful, like I get really nervous every single year. Some of the people in the Euromastics communities or the groups might think I'm a little arrogant, which is fine. But the reality is, every single winter, I'm terrified. I think, well, this is it. This is the year when none of them breed and I'm exposed as a total fraud. Or like, this is the year where nobody breeds and I completely lose my business. Or this is the year where everybody breeds, but nobody wants Euromastics and I don't sell any. So those stresses are always there in my mind. But I don't care, man. I want to do what I want to do. And if something happens and it doesn't work out, then I'll move on to something else, but I'm still going to be breeding Euromastics. So whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think something that you've done and you've done really well is you filled a niche. And that's something that I talk a lot about when people talk to me about doing reptiles full-time. I'm not doing reptiles full-time. I'm working on getting up to that level. But it's just like filling a niche. If I went into breeding reptiles, I mainly do snakes. If I went into that saying, I want to become a ball python breeder, I mean, it might be possible, but let's be honest here. In the US, that niche is filled.
It's going to be difficult. Yeah.
You have all the big guys who are producing thousands of offspring a year in everything from high-end normals to $15,000 snakes.
Sure.
And trying to squeeze into that is very difficult.
Yeah.
It's definitely not impossible, but it is very difficult. And I think the only way you would be able to squeeze into a niche that's already been filled is to get up your online following, or just produce something that no one else is producing, which is difficult. So yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I've thought a lot about this too, because like I've bred other things like, I've worked with leopard geckos over the years. I've worked with bearded dragons over the years. A handful, African fat tail geckos. And sometimes most of the time I got in, when I worked with them, it wasn't because I wanted to produce anything interesting. It's because it's damn fun to produce cool looking animals. Right. And so I think that even though I agree that it can be difficult to break into an already well-dominated and well-defined field, I don't think it's probably not that. It's probably not as difficult as some people might think. It's like, look at like dogs and cats, right? There are definitely people who make their living breeding certain breeds and they dedicate their lives to golden retrievers or to Bengal cats or something like that, right?
Right.
But I think there's still a lot of space for someone who said, who got into reptiles today and said, oh, I want to work with leopard geckos. Okay, great. If that's what you want to do for a living, you can definitely do it. You just have to be willing to put in more time. Right. So I think it's less about difficulty and more about just like the amount of mileage you're going to have to put in. If I wanted to be a full-time leopard gecko or bearded dragon breeder, it's probably a longer road for me than it would be if I was going to say, take on something like Euromastics or Xenogama, because, like if you've bred one species of Euromastics, you are set apart from 90% of the hobby, period. Just from doing that, because it's just not done that often. So then if you breed more than one species, or you've bred one species more than 1 year, now you're up in the 99%, the 1%. You're such a short list of people who have done that. 100%. So it just means, I think it's less about difficulty and more just about mileage. So it's like probably a shorter route to get to this end than it would be to do in a more established niche. And you want to look, and the other thing is, if I was going to transition into leopard geckos for some reason, the last thing I would try to do would be to try to find something totally new. That would be the last thing I'm going to do. The thing that I would try to do would be to say, all right, these are the 5 varieties of leopard gecko that I love the most, and I'm going to just go hard on making the very best of those, because there's enough of them. Same thing with ball pythons. There's enough of those things, enough mutations and varieties where you could say, well, look, I'm just the best with ultramels, or I'm the best with white and yellow leopard geckos, or that's my thing. I want to be that guy for that variety. And even if you may not be the only guy doing it, but again, you build up enough time, you put in enough hours, and you dedicate yourself to that, and be willing to say, I'm probably not going to get paid for this for a while, or I'm not going to get paid what I should get for a while. You'll probably get to that same end in some regard.
Right. I can definitely agree to that. I think another kind of part of it is, I think the effort you have to put in would be different. Let's say, just for the comparison's sake, it took the same amount of time to breed ball pythons professionally and Uromastyx professionally, right?
Oh, sure.
It won't, but let's just say it did. The effort you're going to have to put in to doing ball pythons would be different than Uromastyx. Obviously they're different species, snakes, lizard, yada, yada.
Yeah.
But because one is so popular, you have to do other things like growing social media, like trying to find an inner niche, with a certain genetic thing, like you were mentioning. And I think that sometimes people don't realize that when they're getting into those kind of more commonly kept species that are kind of filled, is like, you can't do it the same as, let's say, someone who does carpet pythons professionally.
Oh yeah.
You have to take a different approach to it to get to that end road.
Yeah.
Because of that niche,
Oh yeah, sure.
Which can be tricky and forgotten.
Oh yeah. I mean, by all means, it's certainly not the same formula for everything. You know what I mean? Like I mentioned that one of the ones I keep is Xenogama taylori, right? Mm-hmm. And I think so. Xenogama taylori, for my money, are some of the coolest little agamids. They're such fun, interesting little lizards, and they have a lot of potential. And I think for a lot of reasons, but it's a totally different animal than breeding Uromastyx. I mean, Uromastyx, they take anywhere from 3 to 5 years to reach sexual maturity. They only breed once a year. They lay one clutch. They're relatively sensitive to change and to adjustments, whereas the Xenogama, they can be sexually mature at a year old, sometimes younger if they grow fast enough. They lay anywhere from 1 to, I've heard, as many as 5 clutches in a season. Most of mine do 3.
Wow.
They relatively high clutch volume, right? So you're talking 4 to 10 eggs in a clutch, and they're just quick. They're just faster. They turn over a lot faster. It's a lot faster pace. Right. But also, the demand isn't yet where it is for Uromastyx, right? Like I can I hatch any species of Euro. Somebody wants them right now, which is great. With Xenogama, it's a different approach because I'm breeding them and there is a base demand, but I'm also like having to convince people, say, hey, like you've never heard of a Xenogama taylori. Let me show you. Like these things are amazing. You should watch them. There's something interesting going on here. They are really fun to keep. They're basically like a diurnal knobtail gecko, and they're really fun and they breed well, and they're great and they're tiny. They're only this big as an adult, so they're perfect for smaller enclosures, for people with smaller spaces who don't want to dedicate huge vivariums to very large animals. They're interactive. They can be housed together. I mean, so it's like a different kind of battle.
Right.
Same thing could be said of different snake species, right? Like personally, I'm in Colorado, so we have Western hognose snakes out here. Hognose are awesome. If I was going to keep a snake, one snake as a pet that I just would love to hang on to, it would be Western hognose snakes, but I can't keep them because they're native, right? But trying to convince people that hognose are the animal to keep is very different than trying to convince someone that a garter snake is the animal to keep, right? Because a garter snake, while very cool and really fun and whatever, can be a little bit messy. They smell a little bit more, right? They scent mark all over you. I mean, I guess other snakes will do that too. I'm just saying it's like.
No, I get it. It's a good comparison.
Animal. Yeah, it's a different animal, right?
Yep. Yeah, 100%. I mean, something that I think is also important, and I think you kind of touched briefly on, is like when you find your niche and what you want to work with, really dive into that rabbit hole and like kind of obsess over it.
Oh yeah, sure.
Right. So when I was getting into breeding and, trying to do this full time, building up my collection, everything like that, I thought like long and hard for a solid 6 months. Like, what do I want to work with, and does it make sense?
Yeah, sure.
Because like in my mind, doing ball pythons, it just didn't make sense, right? Doing corn snakes didn't make sense. Leopard geckos didn't make sense. So I was running through these species, and then when you finally hit that species where you're like, that makes sense, this will get me the income that I want. This has a high demand with a low kind of income into the market, a low amount of individuals being entered into the market. Like those are the real gold mines.
Yeah.
When it comes to breeding. So the species that I'm mostly working with, I got blood pythons, king snakes, and carpet pythons.
Nice.
Right? Blood pythons, I kind of just chose them. I like them. And the people who do keep them will pay a lot of money for the nice morphs.
Sure.
They're
awesome.
$1,000.
Yeah, they're nice. They're super, super cool snakes.
Yeah, they're really fun. But then I also think on let's say I'm vending at an expo. How's my table going to look if I just have blood pythons, right? Sure, the blood python people will love it.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are going to just walk past it.
Well, and because blood pythons also are notoriously assholes, right?
Exactly. So that's very niche, and I'm happy to be filling that. But then when you add, let's say, king snakes into the mix, now your average beginner keeper who wants something a little unique, a little fun, okay, now they're also interested in my table.
Sure.
Right. Okay. But what about people who want to keep something arboreal? Well, now they're walking past my table. So that's something that I thought a lot about when getting into, the business mind of things, was just how can I array to the widest market and to the most people to get the most the largest customer base I can.
Sure.
And I guess where I'm going with this and how this is going to play into what I'm going to ask you is like, how did you kind of figure out that Uromastyx was a niche that you could fill better than, let's say, bearded dragons or a different species? How is this something that you can do better than someone else, and how did you figure that out?
Okay. So, a couple of ways of answering that. The first would be, as I mentioned, I didn't set out to make it a business, right? I bred a handful of stuff, got good results from, everything I had produced, I sold. And then the more and more I worked with Euros, the more I realized, just for whatever reason, I just get them. Like something about them, I connect with them. I understand a little bit more about them than I do other reptiles. Like I have decent success breeding several different things. It's not, I'm certainly not a one-trick pony in that regard.
Right.
However, it was just more of like just following what I was most interested in. This is what I like. And we live in a country of like 330, 340 million people, right? So it seems to me that if I like it, there's probably 10 million other people out there who also like it. And I think it'd be very, very difficult to fulfill that demand. There's not that many Uromastyx in the United States. And, even things like bearded, in a country of 340 million people plus and growing, herpetoculture is a very, very quickly growing industry. Yeah. So regardless of whatever it is you work with, if you give it enough dedication and you show it off in a good light and make it look cool, you're going to find people who are interested in keeping them. Sort of a slightly different example would be animals that I don't like to keep, like, for example, venomous, right? Like, all props to the people who will keep venomous reptiles. I don't have the stones for it. It's just not for me. I cut myself with knives accidentally cutting vegetables. I'm going to get bit by a damn venomous snake, so I'm not keeping it. I think people should keep it, right? I think people should be able to keep venomous reptiles, obviously. But like, if there's enough of a demand and a niche for venomous reptiles, you can definitely find people to like. People will buy chocolate covered cockroaches to eat, my man. You know what I'm saying? So like, you can. I don't care what reptile you're working with, you're going to find a market for it. You know what I mean? And especially when it's a growing market and a growing industry and a growing field. So I just, and so I don't know, maybe that's not a super concise answer, because I can't say that again, none of it was conscious. I didn't say like, well, it seems to me that there's a demand for Uromastyx. Now, right. I know some people who might have made that conclusion, right? Maybe they looked around and they thought, all right, there's none of these. I'm going to work with that. Okay, that's cool. I think that's a totally legitimate way of going about it, but it just wasn't how I came to it. It was just following what I was interested in. Now, I think one of the reasons it's better to follow what you're just interested in instead of looking and being too analytical about it is I just don't think humans are very good predictors. We're not very good at predicting anything. And so I don't like it. I can't imagine that I would, like, my conviction on Uromastyx is the same as my conviction on Xenogama. It's like, I keep them. I see how cool they are. I think they're awesome. I know other people will definitely think they're awesome because they are, but I couldn't say, if I decided to change gears altogether and say, okay, I'm going to work with snakes, just snakes. I'm going to forget lizards. I'm not keeping them. And I decided to just keep snakes. I don't think I'd be able to analytically look and say, oh, well, there's a shortage of gray-banded king snakes for sure. So I'm going to go ahead and buy up as many gray bands as I can, and I'm going to buy the localities, and I'm going to try to morph them out, and I will be successful because they are, they're like available. So right. I don't know. Maybe that makes sense. Maybe it doesn't.
No, it definitely makes sense, and it's a different perspective than what I've heard and from the people I've talked to. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely interesting hearing that side of things. A lot of the guys I know that also do reptiles full times, they did kind of take that more analytical position. But then I also know guys who have taken the position that you've done, taken that route of just kind of like seeing where things take you, whatever happens. And it's worked out great for you, Mm-hmm. So I always find it interesting to like kind of see how people differentiate. I definitely pronounced that wrong, but I think you get what I mean.
Yeah, I do.
How they kind of differ from person to person on how they've started and how they're running their business. Mm-hmm. So I think those things are very interesting. I'm going to kind of swerve the topic. We're getting kind of late in the stream. Is there any chance you could take out some euros, kind of show us some of the things you got?
Dude, I would totally do that, but I'm not at my shop. I'm at my house. So all my animals are over at my place, so I can't.
Oh, you have a different shop for your animals?
Yeah. I've got
that's awesome.
I've got a space for them. Yeah. I have a couple of Knolls here, but they're just little tiny baby Cuban Knolls sitting around over here.
Cuban Knolls?
Yeah.
Those are fun.
Yeah,
fun.
They are. They're really cool. Otherwise, I would happily do that. I didn't even
think
about it.
You're all good. That's a hope of mine to get a facility one day.
It's a lot, man. Don't hope too much. It's a lot of damn money, but it's fun. It's nice to have it so where space isn't such a premium. If I wanted to, I could build a cage for a lace monitor if I wanted, but but it's hard. Doing it as a business, there were so many learning curves for me that I had to figure out, because of course there's no course on it. You can't take you can take business classes and all that other stuff, but it's different when it's animals. Animals are so different, and they're harder to rely on. I had like 4 or 5 really consistent good seasons before I was like, okay, I can do this. If I move, I can do this again. There's no way I could have done this after 1 or 2 good seasons. There's no way. It would have been too big of a risk for my taste,
Right.
But after having 5 or so good seasons under my belt, it was like, all right, I don't like the idea, but I feel comfortable moving into a bigger space. And even doing that, even planning my move the way I did, where I waited until after. So I moved in 2020, and all of it was right before the pandemic, or right when the pandemic hit. Basically, I signed the lease on my place, so that was cool. But I waited to move all my breeders until all the females had laid their eggs, because if you move a female when she's gravid, you're probably going to get duds with Uromastyx. It's just the way it is. The stress of moving is such that it just screws with them. Doesn't happen across the board, but like 75+% of the time, it's been pretty bad.
Right.
So I waited for all the females to lay their eggs. And then once they laid and had a few days of recovery and a little bit under their belt, then I moved them to the shop. And so then what happened was I had winter in 2020 at my place into spring of 2021. And that was a big test, because it was like, okay, I've moved, which I know usually screws Uromastyx up. And I also had, it takes a couple of years to work out the quirks of your space.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had all of my methods set for where I was, the wattage of bulb I was using, the size of cage, my routine. I mean, everything, how I adjusted the lights in going into the winter and coming out into the spring and all these other things.
Right.
All of that was tuned to the space I was in previously. And when I moved it into this warehouse, winter of 2020 happens, go into spring of 2021, I still got good breeding. I still technically produced more animals in 2021 than I did in any year before. However, I also had a lot more hiccups. So I had 2 or 3 animals that just didn't breed at all. They just decided, I'm taking this whole year off, right? Or 2 or 3 or nada anyway. I had a couple of mishaps where there was a newer female Yemenensis who didn't lay her eggs as she should have. All my animals use the nest box, no problem. They go in, they dig, they lay their eggs. It's no big deal. But this female never used her nest box and just started dropping eggs all around the cage. And so that was a problem, because when they do that, the eggs don't survive. It's, like she laid, I think 18 or 20 eggs total, and 3 of them hatched. So it's like, it's just that happens, right? I was pulling an Ornata clutch out with my mom, and she was holding the tub, and I put the eggs in the thing, and then I went to take them from her, and we dropped the container. And only, I think, 5 or 6 of those babies hatched, and there was a 19 egg clutch. So it's like, just hiccups happened. You know what I mean? Yeah. I think some stuff just didn't quite work out. And now that I have another year under the belt, I've got, I went through winter of 2021, and now we're into 2022. This year looks like it's going to be much, much more consistent and much more like the years previously where I was in my basement. So the other feature is that in 2021, before my move, all my animals bred in about the same 4 to 5 week window, which is cool in some ways, because it showed me that everyone in the room was on the same schedule of seasons. Everyone was really dialed in, and it also made it so that way eggs and babies all showed up at the same time. And so it was like, I went from having just my adult breeders, and in the span of 4 weeks, it was like 3 times as many animals in the shop, because there were all these babies hatching, which is cool, but it's a lot of work to just hit you overnight. So in 2021, they spread out a lot. So a lot of the animals bred over a much longer time frame. I had months, like 3 months or so, where animals were breeding and laying eggs, maybe 4. It was a lot. Wow. So it was like spread out a lot. This season, it seems like it's going back to being more like animals are breeding around the same time. Except for my Egyptian Uromastyx, which for some reason started mating over Christmas, and she lays her eggs in January. I don't know why, but that's been pretty weird. But to see it go, it makes me feel more confident to see them going back to mating in the same, 6 week window. It makes me feel a little more comfortable, a little more confident.
Yeah, 100%. I can definitely imagine that. I had the unfortune of having to move right when one of my big females was going into ovulation soon.
Oh yeah.
Which, I mean, it stunk. I was so nervous. I think everything is okay. I think we should be on the right track for everything.
Yeah.
But I still haven't gotten that pre-ovulation shed. So
yeah,
we'll kind of see how it goes. But that was a little bit of a bummer.
it's hard.
Yeah,
moving's rough, man. Moving's really, really rough. And especially when your financial well-being depends on it, you got to be really, really particular about what you move, when, how you move it, all of those different things. It's a lot. It's a lot to balance.
Yeah, it is. I mean, when I moved, my collection was at, oh man, I think I only had like seven snakes at the time. So not very big, but the crappy thing and the one shitty part of the situation was the fact that female's clutch, I am kind of dependent on that to move forward this year.
Gotcha.
Right? So if I want to move forward at all this year, if I want to get any more breeders in, I need that clutch.
Yep.
You know, that's going to be the income that pays for any new breeders this year.
Totally.
Otherwise, I have to wait till next year.
Totally.
Which would be a bummer, but I feel like that's also just part of starting. You know,
Yeah.
You want things to go a certain way, and they're probably not going to go that way.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, you definitely need, in the beginning, it's really helpful to like get those animals initially breeding, not only so you can figure out your methods, but so that way you can get a little bit of income to start growing your breeding colony. I'm lucky enough to be at the point where now it's been a long time since I've had to bring in animals from outside. All of my animals just come from my own breeding. And that's a real luxury, you know, because you know everything about where they came from, how they were raised, how they grew up. You don't have to worry about anybody else caring for them incorrectly or doing something wrong. I mean, it's a real benefit, but it takes a long time to be willing to do that. But always take it from me, man, someone who has not done this enough. Hold back your own animals. Hold back animals. Keep some of your animals. Like, it's so tempting. It's so tempting, especially when you've got bills to pay, to sell what you've got. But I'm telling you, you will kick yourself in the ass for not doing it if you don't do it. If you get that clutch, you damn well keep at least one of those things.
Yeah, no, 100%. I was talking to Jeremy.
Jeremy who?
Jim Turgeon. He used to be the manager at Nerd.
Oh, nice. Yeah, cool.
So I was talking to him about just like, you know, kind of starting up. Mm-hmm. And he brought up a great point. And that was, if you hold an animal back and you're a little bit unsure, you know, you want to sell it. Mm-hmm. Let's say from this clutch, I get the nicest baby possible, right? That'd be like $2,000 ish. Mm-hmm. And that's for a baby. Let's say I raise that thing up for 2 years and I decide to sell it. Mm-hmm. It's now like $3,500.
Totally. Yeah.
You know, so I think that's now the way I look at holdbacks is like, okay, let's keep this, see how things go. If in the future I decide to sell it, I only make more money.
Yeah, sure. Totally. So, so I've actually done something sort of similar. So with my ornates, those are the ones that are just far and away the most popular, like the highest demand comes for ornata in particular. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I do is I've never been one to keep waiting lists or anything like that because, well, for tons of different reasons. One, it's a lot of time to have to go through a list, send everybody an email and wait for replies, wait for the people who like, I'm not interested anymore, all this shit. I really just don't want to bother with that. I'm not organized enough. It's just not the way my personality works. So what I do is now I will post when stuff hatches. And when, let's say it's a clutch of 10, or let's do 20. It's a clutch 20. When those hatch, I'll let people reserve 10 of them. I'll let people put deposits down on 10 of those animals. And then 5 of them I'll wait and then I'll hold back the other 10 for an extra 3 months. And then I'll sell that. And what that does is it allows me to let the 10 of the animals that I like best, I can let them grow up a little bit and they get to a size where I can sex them. That way I can pick my holdbacks and know exactly which ones are male or female. If I pick my holdbacks from fresh hatchlings, I might not end up with the sex ratios I need. So if I give them all a little bit of time to grow, I can wait. But it also gives people like people still get a shot at them at a baby hatchling price. You know what I mean? But then once they're a sexable adult, or not adults, but when they're sexable juveniles, I will sell them for more because they're worth more at that point. If it's not just because they're older, but because if I know for sure one is a male, everybody wants a male Ornata. That's what everybody wants. It's got to be a male. Oh, pick me a male. Pick me a male. I'm like, good luck. It can't, you know what I mean? It's like they're very hard to sex. And females also get very, very colorful. So I think it's a total nonsense. But anyway, so I tend to wait. And I mean, on the one hand, it does make you a little more money. The motivations for doing it, it's not monetary in this situation. It's more of like, I just need to know what my holdbacks are. You know, I got to know that the animals I'm keeping back, this one's a male, this one's a female. I have to know. Yeah. Otherwise you end up with, 10 holdbacks and you need a 5.5, but you got 7.3. And it's like, all right, I have these extra males I have to get rid of now, or I don't need any more in it. It just doesn't fit into my planning very well,
No, I mean, I doubt that would kind of fit into anybody's planning. I mean, the nice thing about snakes is pretty much the week after they hatch, you can sex them.
Yeah, for sure.
That is a luxury that I'm happy to have. Makes life so much simpler. And like on a monetary prospect, it also helps because females sell for like $300 more.
Yeah, for sure. In a lot of these Euros, it's the other way around. Everybody wants the males because the males are way nicer colored, at least in general, right? I mean, obviously you get some exceptions. Like that's one of the reasons I like Moroccan Uromastyx is because regardless of whether somebody ends up with a male or a female, they're going to end up with a colorful Euro because both sexes get incredible color. So I think they're excellent candidates for the pet trade in that regard. Like I definitely almost don't want a day to come when I can tell at hatching or near hatching, like what sex ornates are, because people don't want females, people will get them and they'll be happy with them if they have them. But everybody has this assumption that they're going to get a dull animal just because it's a female. It's not true. Lots of females have tons of color. And they're both equally valuable, equally worthy creatures. So I have some jealousy of the way like certain other aspects of herpetoculture work. Sometimes sexing is one of those things where like, damn, I wish Euros were a little easier to sex for this reason or another reason. But I could see it being a little different with snakes.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the one annoying thing I find about breeding snakes, and especially breeding pythons, I find this a lot with them, is like getting them to eat.
Oh yeah, sure.
You'll lose like in bad cases, you can lose half a clutch.
Yeah,
they just will not go on food, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm fairly sure that Euros don't have as severe as a problem when it comes to getting onto food.
No way.
So that is something that can be a little bit of an ass pain with snakes. It's just that picky aspect of them. And then you need to dive down a whole other rabbit hole of like all the tricks and nicks to get them on food. Yeah. Which is, a few years in the learning process for new keepers.
Totally. Well, I mean, yeah, but you end up with some other complications, right? So one thing that you can see in Uromastyx is people feed, if you give babies too much dry food, and specifically like little, I can't think of like a very specific example, but like I've seen people for baby Uromastyx, they put whole bowls of seeds and lentils in the cage, and it's like that will kill your Euro right there. I mean, not it's probably not going to kill them, but it has a very high likelihood of doing it if it's with a baby. Babies are so small, you don't want to risk that kind of thing. So even though they're all pretty willing feeders, you have other problems to deal with, such as, like I said, if you give them something weird, occasionally, so across the last 5 years, I've lost maybe anywhere from 3 to 5 babies total every year. Just for one reason or another. But we're talking
that's a pretty good success rate, though.
It's pretty good. Yeah, 3 to 5 out of 195 is not too bad.
That's good.
Obviously, would prefer if none of them died, right? But it does happen. And most of the time it's been from something totally unknown. I can't figure out, like usually what'll happen is I'll get a clutch and there'll be one baby in there, and you can tell the second it starts to happen, you're like, this one animal just stops eating, starts losing weight, still gets up and walks around and does its thing, but just checks out. You do all you can. I separate them out from the others, try to give it special food. I mean, do whatever I can to try to get it going, and it just doesn't work. So the animal croaks. But more often, that the bigger problem is, even though I don't have to worry about force feeding, I do have to worry about assholes. Most baby uromastics. So the conjecture, biologically speaking, is that because they're desert reptiles, when they hatch out, it is in their best interest to chase each other out of their territory. So that way the territory they get has a sufficient amount of food to support them, that one animal, right? Mm-hmm. So what that translates to is sometimes you get whole clutches where the babies beat the living shit out of each other. And if you don't separate them, they will kill each other, or they'll really, really damage one another. So you don't want any of those things to happen, but it does happen, and you got to be careful about it, So there's definitely lots of challenges there, that's a big one. The other challenge is when you're keeping a bunch of lizards, with snakes. One of the things I like about certain snakes and geckos is that you can keep, if you choose to keep them in a rack system, you can keep them solo. I love that. That's my whole bag. I think all reptile, well, not all reptiles. I think most reptiles, a lot of reptiles are best solo, right? For most of the year. 100%. And that's the way I do it with uromastics, except for babies. So the babies will fight. Maybe you'll get the occasional one that croaks, but also you've got the feces to deal with, because you get 20 ornata in one tub or two tubs. You got 10 per tub. They eat all day long and they shit 4 times a day. And then when they, especially if they start fighting, not only does their shit get a little more like watery because of the stress, but they also chase each other around the cage. So they run through that watery poo and smear it all. It's like they Picasso paint the walls. So it can be a pain if you aren't prepared to mitigate those things. There are things you can do to make it so that doesn't really happen, but it's a thing you have to learn how to deal with, much like learning how to get an animal that maybe isn't naturally inclined to eat rodents. You have to do something to try to, maybe you have to scent the pinky with some shed skin, or scent it with a frog, or whatever,
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm going to grab one of my snakes out, something to look at. But I think those are definitely good points. And I think it's also something that like every industry with breeding has to deal with. When it comes to reptiles, is like everything has their unique problems.
Sure.
And that's why I think, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, like it's important to like, once you figure out what you're going to work with, to dive deep into that.
Totally.
Then you can figure out those problems to get the best success.
Yeah, for sure.
So this is my male blood python.
Sick. Nice. It's a nice looking snake.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a good breeder as well.
That's cool. What was that, an albino?
Yeah, so he's a T-negative albino matrix genetic stripe.
What's the matrix?
So the matrix just kind of disrupts the patterning along the sides.
Sick. Oh, sick. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Obviously, the stripe is just the big striping that goes down it.
Right.
Matrix also has a weird kind of thing of it. When you have a non-albino, so just a normal baby that's a matrix, their tongues will be pink. So that's how you can always identify them.
And what color are their tongues normally?
Black.
Oh, damn. Okay, that's cool. Weird.
Yeah, so it's a funky little.
That's sick. Is that a codom?
No, so it's an incomplete dom. Oh yeah, so that would be codom.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So the super matrix are the ivories. So those are all white.
Oh, tight. Okay. Yeah, I've seen those. Dude, blood pythons are crazy snakes. Really cool.
I'm lucky with this guy. He's super, super friendly.
Nice.
But my female, she's a monster.
Yeah, I used to work at a local shop here back when I was in high school and college, and some of the snakes that bit me the most were blood pythons.
Yeah, my female, she's easily the hardest snake I've ever worked with.
Okay.
Just because she's like 20 pounds,
Yeah, it's
almost
pretty
6
hefty.
foot, and
Yeah.
like just an absolute meat rocket. I
Yeah,
mean, she will just launch at you.
Yeah, they hit pretty hard for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Big time.
Mhm.
But yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely a topic that I feel like is kind of overlooked, is the business side of things. You have your consumers, they kind of just, they buy from your breeders and your hobbyist breeders, whatever that they buy. And then you have your breeders who I think often don't talk about business because of the fear for, what's the word I'm thinking for? Kind of a social.
They don't want to seem like they don't want to seem like they're being exploitative.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Understandable. Yeah.
Yeah, it is understandable. I think it's a bummer though, because I feel like there's a lot of education that could be done by talking about the business thing. And I think it could help a lot of smaller breeders kind of find their way.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, it's a fun topic to talk about.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's hard. It's challenging stuff. The business is rough, man. I mean, I can't imagine trying to do, say, like what, let's say like someone like, like Snakes at Sunset, Michael Barrera.
Yeah.
I can't imagine trying to do a business like that. Not because there's anything wrong. It's awesome. I just mean that that's a guy who's got so many things going on at once. I could never do that. I mean, I'm overwhelmed with the number of species I have now. Yeah. But then having a business where you're buying and selling and breeding and importing and having shops and doing online. I mean, that has got to be such a crazy minefield that could be really difficult to navigate. I couldn't do that personally. It'd be very difficult for me, but
no, 100%. I couldn't do it either.
Yeah.
Go on.
Oh yeah. I was just going to say that doing what I do has been kind of nice because it's allowed me to, because I'm not the only one anymore. There are some other people breeding Uromastyx here in the States, but because I'm probably the largest and the most vocal, right? Just generally, it's given me the luxury to where I don't have to do some of those things, like the waiting list thing I was talking about before. I don't have to worry about keeping track of anybody or trying to chase down my customers. Like I'm very fortunate in that regard. But it's also, I don't know, it's like I think about a lot of different things. I think about trying to be aware of changes and trends in the industry, and that way I can be resilient to see changes. The last thing I would want to have happen is have some major change happen in the industry that I couldn't adapt to. So I'm really interested in being adaptable and resilient and flexible, so that way I do my best to ensure my future in this as well as the future of the industry itself. Right. That's a whole nother reason why people should definitely pay attention to and donate to US ARC, because
100%.
There's that major legislation right now with the Competes Act thing going on that.
Yeah. Could you kind of explain that?
Man.
I just couldn't get it. I mean, is it,
I can't, I won't do it justice. I promise you. But the basic gist is that it's basically something that's been kind of buried into other legislation,
right,
that would make it so a huge list of reptiles would not be legal to transport over state lines. And it's not just reptiles, it's small mammals and other exotics. And there's some stipulation about the fact that it would allow governing bodies to label animals as potentially dangerous if they could be invasive somehow, somewhere, anywhere in the United States. So it's total nonsense. And if I had a link of it on my Instagram story, but it's also going around. I shared it on Facebook. Lots of other guys shared it on Facebook. You can read the whole bit of legislation, and they also give you links, numbers, and emails to get a hold of your specific political representatives to send them letters and send them emails to respectfully but very forcefully argue your case. So that way,
100%. Everyone watching, make sure you go check out Phillip's Instagram at Arids Only. Definitely do that. Also, go to USARC's website. Donate to USARC.
Donate money.
Even if you can only do $1.
Yeah, for real.
$1 is helpful.
Skip the morning coffee for 2 days to ensure the future of your industry.
Exactly.
Just give them some money.
It's so simple.
Yep.
And it's so important. I mean, I think out of everything that's gone on in the hobby in the 40 years, that it's been a big thing. Out of everything, donating to USARC and supporting them now is one of the most important things anyone can do.
We have to have representation. If we don't have representation, we're going to die. We're going to lose the industry.
And they do a good job. Like USARC is doing an amazing. How they even found it? They found that legislation and all those sheets of paper.
They really do good work, man.
Amazing.
It's good shit.
Yeah, really everyone watching, make sure you donate to USARC.
Totally, for sure.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much a wrap.
Cool, man.
Everyone, thanks for watching. Once again, go check out Phillip's Instagram at Arids Only. Yeah, some pretty awesome shit.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's pretty much that. I'm going to end the live.
Okay, cool.